Hello everybody, and welcome back. Shade right here with another video for you. Let's see if we can scoot this up. So today we're going to try and go over some overclocking for you. And I'm making it specifically right now too because I just had a really good scare on my overclocking. I've gotten pretty much everything, set where I wanted to and stuff like that, so I decided it was time to start tinkering with the RAM and seeing if I could get a higher megahertz RAM, profile to work. And I've done it before, and it's crashed, it's had issues, it beeps at me, it lets me know it's not happy and stuff like that. And trying to get you guys the best view here so you can actually read. It's on my screen. I tried to change through my screen settings and stuff, put on read mode, so hopefully it's less bright and you guys can actually see what the hell's going on here. Should I come closer, forward, back? I mean, what the shit? Alright. That's about as good as it's going to get to where I can see it and you can see it both at the same time. Okay, so right now I have all my stuff set. So we're going to pretend like you just dropped in your 2400G in here after going through the Windows update and the BIOS update and all that stuff. You drop your 2400G in for the first time. You get it all booted up, and you're going to see a black screen first off when you drop that 2400G in here. It's going to say new hardware recognized, or you changed your hardware. Press F1 to go into boot options or your BIOS. And press F2 to load defaults and just continue to Windows. You're going to want to press F1 and come in here to the BIOS. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to switch all my shit back to default. So restore defaults, load all default values, load optimized defaults, yes. And that turns all my stuff back to, I believe, what it should be with you guys. It should be all the same stuff. Turns off my XMP, turns off my overclock. So we're going to save changes and reboot and see it switches all this stuff back, blah, blah. Yes, yes, yes. We're going to hit restart. And I'm going to restart back into default values, just like you guys will be doing when you drop your 2400G in. So as soon as it starts booting up, start hitting delete, 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 delete. If you wait too long and that screen pops up and you don't hit delete right as it pops up, you're going to miss it. It's going to go into Windows. You're just going to have to restart again, come back, hit delete, get in here. Okay, so right off the start, you're going to come into easy mode when you first load up yours. This is what you're going to see. You can't really change much here from easy mode. You could turn on your XMP profile, and you can turn on game boost, but these are pretty much just displays over here showing you, what all this stuff is set at, and it's really nothing you can do to change it or anything like that from here. So what you're going to want to do, but it does tell you, what you're sitting at, what your base clock is set at, which is 100 megahertz, which is what your it's pretty much your multiplier. So when you're typing in, when you're trying to overclock your CPU, you're going to use like 39, and it'll multiply it by 100 megahertz, and that'll give you 3.9 gigahertz. Core number 4, voltage is, preset at auto, all that kind of stuff. Performance boost technology, hyper threading, yes, all that good shit, blah blah. Memory, most stuff is going to preset to 2133. It does realize that it is G skill, 8 gigabytes each, so we've got a 16 gigabyte kit. It does tell you what your XMP profiles are here that it can recognize off of what sticks you put in, and it's showing me 2 profiles, one at 2933, one at 3200 megahertz. I bought 3200 megahertz G skill RAM, so it should go to 3200 no problem. Storage just shows you all the different storages plugged into your different SATAs and shit like that. I only have one plugged in, which is my solid state. I'm going to buy another, either a hard drive or... I don't want hard drives, to be honest. I'm just going to get another solid state. Fan info, blah, blah. Okay, we're going to skip all that. Let's just get into the overclocking. So up here on the top, it says Advanced, F7. If you don't have this button on your motherboard or whatever, click F7 or whatever button it does say up here to go into your tweaker mode or overclocker mode or advanced mode, whatever it is, that your motherboard uses as its terminology. We're going to go into settings. First thing and foremost, settings, look for something around advanced, and then something similar to integrated graphics configuration. You're looking for something called UMA frame buffer size, or VRAM buffer size, or GFX buffer size or something like that. You're going to click it, and it's set at 256 right out of the box. We're going to change it up to 2 gigs. What that is pretty much your VRAM, and meaning video RAM. It's what your graphics card is going to use to process shit, because it doesn't have its own RAM built into the the CPU chip. So your system memory, my 16 gigabytes of G.Skill RAM, is what it's going to use as its VRAM. So it's going to take 2 gigabytes away from my 16. So technically I only have 14 gigabytes of RAM for my system, because that graphics processor is going to use 2 of it, if not more, if it has to. But telling it to at least have 2 gives it a bigger cache to where it doesn't have to try and reach outside of its system to grab more from your RAM. So first and foremost, that's the number one thing you want to do with this. If you're not overclocking, you're not doing any of this stuff, you still want to do this. Go into here, change that, add 2 gigabytes of VRAM. The next thing that you're absolutely going to want to do, even if you're scared of overclocking, is the AXMP profile. It might just be called XMP, it might be AXMP. Somebody else uses an entirely different name, but it'll say something around DDR4, RAM, blah, 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 DRAM. So DRAM setting is AXMP is disabled. Up here on this motherboard, I can turn it on just by clicking this little button here. Turns it on, and I can switch between profile 1 and 2. But I like to do it on here just so I can see exactly what it's doing. So we're going to click AXMP. We're going to select profile 2 because that's my 3200 megahertz, and it already has the timings pre-programmed in there for me and shit like that. So now it's going to change down here. You saw it switch to 3200 megahertz once I pick profile 2. And if I hit disabled, it goes back to 2133. Profile 2, 3200 megahertz. DRAM frequency is set at auto. That's if you want to try and change it again above 3200 megahertz. I don't recommend fucking with that, because that is the only place that I've had tons and tons and tons of crashes and issues and shit like that from, is the DRAM frequency. So select your AXMP, the auto preset one, and leave it the fuck alone. Done. Okay, so you can always come back later after you find out all your other stable shit and try to mess with it from there and stuff like that, but it's not the biggest thing. If you can get up to 3200 megahertz, bam, you're good, you're done. Even 2933, that's a solid freaking speed. It's going to increase your performance drastically just by having those couple things. So now we're going to mess with the CPU settings. And CPU ratio, like I was telling you before, is the multiplier is by 100. Even if you don't know that, even let's say you didn't know what your multiplier was, that's fine. Right here it's saying adjusted CPU frequency is at 3600 megahertz. That's what it comes at right out of the box. That's 3.6 gigahertz. Obviously 1000 megahertz is 1 gigahertz. So what we're going to do is we're going to tinker with this. Now, if you're running this Ryzen 2400G out of the box with the stock cooler, the Ryzen, what is it, Stealth cooler? No, there's a Stealth Inspire. I can't remember which one's better. I think it's the Stealth. The Stealth cooler, it's okay, for what this processor costs, for $170 to be able to do what it can do. But it's not enough. It really, if you want to overclock and you want to get what this chip should be giving you out of its performance, you're going to need a better cooler. The Hyper 212 Evo or whatever it is, or the Be Quiet Pure Rock Slim or whatever, they're like $20 to $30. Those are probably going to be your best bets. I believe the Be Quiet Pure Rock Slim is the better way to go, because it does come with the right mounting brackets for the AM4 motherboard or the AM4 socket, whereas the Hyper 212 does not. If you go to PCPartPicker.com and build your PC on there, it'll tell you compatibility issues, what's going to work, what's not going to work, where, if you have to buy an adapter and shit like that, blah blah. So PCPartPicker.com is the place to go. But I highly recommend getting a better cooler. It will allow you to overclock drastically better, and it will allow you to overclock both sides of your CPU. One side of the CPU, obviously, is the CPU. The other side is the graphics processor. So they took away a bunch of your PCI Express lanes that are usually built into like an RX 1600, and they put the graphics processor in where those PCI lanes are. It doesn't change the performance that much. Everyone's done tests and everything, and it's pretty damn close to being the same performance on the cores, even without all those PCI Express lanes in there. So if you're overclocking your CPU and you're overclocking the other side, being the GPU, you're adding a lot of heat into the diode, or the actual chip itself. So you want to get a better cooling unit so that you can really take advantage of your overclocking. So right out of the gate, we're all set. We're still all set at, you know, standard stock speeds right now. I'm going to leave those two things. We're at 2 gigabytes of RAM, and we're at 3200 megahertz. I'm not even going to change the CPU ratio yet, and I'm not going to change the GFX clock frequency yet. We're just going to hit F10, and it tells you right here what you changed: the frame buffer size to 2 gigs and XMP profile 2. That's all I've changed. Hit yes. It saves it. It reboots. It reloads everything. And it's going to stick you into Windows or, you know, your boot option, depending on if you press delete or not. So right now we're just going to jump into Windows, and we're going to show you what this thing can do with just these settings enabled. So if you already have your 2400G up and running and you've ran some tests and you haven't overclocked anything, you can compare your base scores compared to what I'm about to do right now. And you can see what the difference is going to be just by increasing your VRAM buffer and increasing your RAM speed. So everything's loading up, blah de blah, exit out of OneDrive, no Steam right now. So like a free benchmark that everybody can get is going to be Cinebench. So we'll go to downloads, Cinebench. Everybody can get Cinebench. And we'll run Cinebench. So right now, we're going to run, first off, we'll run OpenGL, which is the graphics processing side of it. So we're going to hit run. And it'll load everything up, and it'll crank through. This test only takes like a minute, maybe 2 at the most. Reference match doesn't really mean shit. That's not an actual like standard to judge it by or anything like that. As you can see, it ran through it pretty darn good. There was no bugs, no glitches, no hiccups, nothing like that. But this isn't a very demanding benchmarking test, to be honest. So we got an average of 63 frames per second, which is sitting below both of whatever the hell these things are, the Quadro processors, which I'm really not sure what those are, to be honest. Oh, it's an i7, Intel i7 4770 CPU, NVIDIA Corporation, OpenGL version, Windows 60-bit, Cinebench. Okay, so apparently, it actually does tell you what they are. That's an i7 4770, and that's an i7 3840 QM. So we did worse than both of them, but just by a little bit. You know, the i7 4770 CPU. It doesn't tell you like what processor, like if it's running on its own graphics, or if it's running on a an actual video processor. But anyways, we're gonna skip that. We only lost to the i7 47 or 3770 by 2 frames per second. Now we're gonna hit the multi-core CPU. And we're going to let this run for a second and see what this guy comes up with. Now, this one has nothing to do with your graphics card whatsoever. This is all pure central processing unit power. So, again, we're sitting at 3.6 gigahertz with a boost clock up to 3.9, I believe. I'm not even 100% sure if I turned on that boost clock, to be honest. So it might just be running at 3.6 gigahertz flat right now. I probably should have turned on that gaming boost button, because I'm pretty sure that's what gives you your boost clock up to 3.9, even though it says it only gives you 250, which would only take you up to 3.85, not 3.9. But I'm not going to argue semantics. Okay, so finished up pretty darn quick, and I got an 839. So even at stock speeds, stock clocks and everything, I got an 839. That's actually not bad, considering the best I've gotten with 4.1 gigahertz was 895. So that's not bad. So you're beating the i7 4770 by, I don't know, 15, whatever the hell it means. And all these other Intel, i7s are the older generation series and shit like that. You're straight crushing them. So the ones that beat you are the i7 3930K, which is probably overclocked, and that bitch is 6 cores, 12 threads. We only have 4 cores, 8 threads. And then, of course, the Intel Xeon CPU, which is 12 cores, 24 threads. That's a pretty hard bad boy to beat. All right, so those two things, you can compare your scores: 63 FPS, 839 CB for multi-core. I'm not going to run a single core just because it takes forever and no one really gives a shit. You can look up other people's single core runs on them. So, even though I know single core is more towards gaming and stuff like that, it's a bitch. It takes forever to run the single core in this thing, especially at 3.6. I've done it at 4.1 and it still took quite a while. So everyone can do that benchmark by itself pretty much. And then Ada64 Engineer, you can get a free version of this. That's the demo version. Ada64 Engineer, and you click this little thing up here, the little graph, and it brings up the stability test. I'm just going to maximize it so you guys can actually see. And up here you pick what you want: stress CPU, stress FPU, stress cache, stress system memory. And I've picked stress GPU, but it doesn't display on here even once I click it. So I don't think it really makes a fucking difference whether you do. I'm going to click it on. I don't think it does anything, but we'll click it anyways. So right down here, it's going to show your CPU usage. Right now we're sitting at about 2 to 3% because I'm not doing anything. And then here it'll show you temperatures, which is actually really nice. So your motherboard is going to be the yellow one, the CPU is going to be the blue one, and the solid state drive is going to be the, I don't know, burnt, rusty color. So we're going to hit start. And what it's going to do down here, you see it cranks that CPU usage up right to 100%. Obviously, there's no reason why this thing should have any issues whatsoever on this kind of a test, because we're running at stock speeds. I haven't increased any voltage, I haven't increased the core clock, anything like that, but it's just giving me a baseline of, what you can expect with a stock one, and then we can compare it against, what you do when you do overclock it. So the CPU is sitting at 64 degrees right now. That's where, you can change fan speeds and all that kind of stuff. My PC pretty much wants to sit up around 60-something degrees. My fans don't even really kick in and start trying to really cool shit until it's in the 60-degree range. So that's usually where shit sits. Especially at 100% usage, it's going to be around 60%. Other than that, that's pretty much it. My motherboard's sitting at 42 degrees. My solid-state drive's at 30 degrees. And this is all measured in Celsius, of course. As much as, us Americans love our Fahrenheit. Celsius is the way they measure everything in the other parts of the world. So we're going to hit stop. This really isn't telling us anything other than, sitting at 65, 67. You can look at the statistics in here, and it shows you CPU current 57, minimum was 29, maximum was 67. I was averaging 49.6 degrees Celsius on the test. It tells you your CPU fans and what kind of, what's called, what they're spinning at and shit like that. This stuff, blah-de-blah, CPU core clock speeds and blah-blah-blah, gives you all that kind of stuff. None of that really matters. So we're going to exit out of this guy. So not bad, not bad. Now, let's actually put it through a test that's a little more demanding, and we can actually see some hiccups, and some hesitation, even stock right out of the box. So even with that RAM cranked up, we're going to go into... So if you go to, I believe it's Unigen. We'll start off with the weak one. Yeah, unigen.com. They have free benchmarks that you can download, like the Heaven benchmark, the Valley benchmark, and the Superposition benchmark. And there's another one too. I just didn't get the fourth one because the three's enough. But they're all from different years. Like this Heaven benchmark, I think was made back in like 2007 or 2009. The Valley one was like 2011, 2013, and then the Superposition is the most recent one in 2017. And they all show pretty much what you can expect from different years of when your game was produced or what game you're playing and shit like that. So this one back from 2007, I honestly have the most issues with. When I overclock all my shit and I run the two newer benchmarks, they run fine for the most part. They're just really, the FPS is low. When I run this thing, I get super high FPS and a bunch of crashes and a bunch of glitches and a bunch of shit like that when I'm putting my thing to the maximum. So I'm not sure if it's because it's older technology that it's having issues with, newer stuff being cranked up so high. So right now we're on English, preset, basic, extreme. I'm going to go to custom. So we're going to do DirectX 11, quality, we do not want ultra. We're going to go to low, And tessellation, Jesus Christ, disabled. I'll switch everything back to basic and then go to custom. Yeah, okay, because if you go into extreme and then go to custom, it leaves a bunch of those extreme things in there. Holy shit. So we're going to go to DirectX 11, and then quality is set at medium, tessellation disabled, stereo 3D disabled, multi-monitor disabled, anti-aliasing is set at ×2. I'm not sure if that's the way I want that. So we'll leave it on, and we're going to go to full screen. We're going to do 1920 by 1080p, so that is displaying in 1080p at, we're going to do low settings. I'm not sure if anti-aliasing is supposed to be at 2 or off. I think we're going to start with it off. I'm going to switch everything the fuck off. Low settings, 1080p. Let's see what happens. Run. So this, again, remember, this is pretty much stock, other than the RAM being cranked up to 3200. Oh, and your VRAM buffer being set to 2 gigabytes. Okay, and we're off to the races. So let's see, it's sitting at about 58 frames per second. What we're going to do is we're going to go up here and hit benchmark. And it'll actually run a benchmark. And then down here, you can kind of see... God, you can't see shit, can you? No, you can't see a dick. Well, I hope you guys can see it. But down here it shows, you know, like frames per second, time that's running for, minimum FPS, it hit 40 for the minimum, maximum FPS at 78. And currently we're sitting at... Oh, Jesus, just jumped up. So different scenes have different ones. Like right now we're sitting at 90 frames per second. And again, remember, this is 1080p low on an older game. So at 1080p low settings with everything else turned off, we're cranking out 60 to 90 frames per second on stock settings. I mean, that's pretty fucking good. So let this run for a minute or two. It does take, these are real benchmarks, so these ones actually do take a few minutes. There's about 26 scenes, and we're on scene, let's see, 6 right now. But still sitting at 60 frames a second. And as you can see with 1080p, I mean, it looks great. If I was to go down to like 720p and crank all the settings up to high, it still doesn't look this good. Sorry, chiefin'. So, I mean, 1080p to 720p really does show a drastic difference. And it will show a drastic difference in frames, especially on newer games as well, too. Like, I can run that one, the newer benchmark, at 720p high, and it just looks like crap. I can get 60 frames, no problem, but it doesn't look all that great because it's fucking 720p. Once you see 1080 and you switch over to 720, you're like, ugh, why? Why would I want to play on this? But that being said, there are going to be some games, like I said, if you want to play that new, what is it, Ghost Recon Wildlands or whatever, from what I've seen on other people testing it, this thing isn't going to do all that great, even when it's overclocked hard. That's a very new game with a lot of fucking settings built into it that is just insanely demanding. That one you might want to play at 720p, and you might actually be able to get some good frames per second out of it. But I don't have that game. I'm not purchasing that game, so I can't test it to show you, unfortunately. But we do have some other things that we can test and show. The Firestrike ones are really good benchmarks, and they really, I mean, they're set, like, they have different benchmarks. Some are set for 4K, some are set for multi-graphics processing, you know, standalone cards. Then there's ones for medium gaming PCs, low-end gaming PCs, and that kind of stuff. So they really do have a bunch of different tests that you can do. And even on the medium gaming PC one, that test, which is pretty much what this would be, I would call, you know, this processor and everything a medium to low-end gaming PC. By no means is it competing with, you know, i7 8700s with a fucking Titan or even a 1080 in there. I mean, that's on a whole different world from what, you know, the power that you can put out with this thing. So don't be confused, you know, no matter what you do, as much as you try to overclock this thing and all that kind of stuff, you're never even going to get close you know, to top end graphics from what a 1080's putting out, or one of those Vega 64s. You know, this is Vega 11. The Vega 64 has literally 6-ish times more fucking processing power, or graphics processing power, than what this thing has. But that being said, it's not like you can't get a great picture, a great frame rate, a great experience off of this thing by itself. I do have an RX 570 coming in. I did get the 8GB edition, and I'm gonna, you know, plug that bitch in and see what this Ryzen 5 can do if you ever do upgrade into a video card in the future and stuff like that, and what kind of gains you can expect and how well it does and stuff like that. So we finished up. So average frames per second sitting at 67 frames per second on 1080p low. That it really is not bad at all. Pretty damn good. And tessellation was disabled. So I think we're going to go back. I've saved all these before. I'm not going to save this one. I got a bunch of other ones saved. So let's go on and quit. And I'm just going to kind of show you the differences. So that's the old one. That one was 2007 or 2009. Then there is the Valley benchmark. Again, we're going to run DirectX 11, quality low, stereo disabled, monitor single, anti-aliasing off, full screen. And we're just going to run. So it's 1080p low again, pretty much. Now this one is a much more open world type of benchmark, where it's got trees and mountains and all this types of shit thrown into it, flowers and grass. So it's a little more demanding. So right out of the gate, we're running at 44 frames per second instead of 60-something frames per second like the other one was. But it did just jump up. So let's hit the benchmark real quick and actually go into the benchmark so we can see minimums and maximums. But as you can see, I mean, it looks great. How's my glare? Not too bad. But there's no hiccuping, no stuttering, no lagging, no skipping, no ripping or tearing. Ripping and a tearing? Ripping and a tearing. None of that's going on. You know, it's running very well. It loads shit up very quickly. And again, this isn't even overclocked. This is just turning my RAM to what it's supposed to be and giving it a 2GB, buffer size. This is completely stock, running at 42, 44 frames per second average. Right out of the box, pretty much. All you got to do is just make your RAM run at what it wants to run at, and give it a little bit more, room to load shit into it, and it does very well. Now, like I was saying, I did order a RX 570 because I'm dumb, and I can't help but spend money when I get free money, and Discover Card gave me free money. So I bought an RX 570 8GB MSI Armor Edition. I got it for $319, which I know is pretty much double about double MSRP-ish, a little less than double MSRP if you're talking about the 8GB card. And within 2 hours of me ordering it, it jumped back up $120. So I got it for $120 less than what it's selling for pretty much everywhere else. So that should be here Wednesday. So I'm doing all these benchmarks and stuff now to try and get some base scores and all that kind of shit, and figure out what the Ryzen can do overclock to its maximum potential with a little $49 water cooler on it. And then I'll pop on that RX 570 and run it again, test the other side of it, test the Ryzen 5 chip with the RX 570 and see what kind of performance it can get not using the GPU, having those PCI Express lanes shaved out, and see how good it does. And my whole reason for it, I don't know if you watch my other video or not, I'm going to cryptocurrency mine with it. That's the whole reason why I even spent the $319. That's all I'm going to do all day, all night while I'm working and sleeping. That bitch is going to be cryptocurrency mining. So I'm going to have it pay itself off, hopefully, within a year is really all I care about. If it can pay itself off in less than a year, which, it should be able to based on what I've seen in other people's videos on 570s, I'll be happy. That's great. And then anything after that, I'll keep mining with it, and then I can pay this fucking rig off too. So my tax return didn't completely go to waste on this rig. And then in the future, I will be building a real mining rig once, you know, I got a little bit more money, and I'm a little more up and up on exactly the best ways to mine Ethereum, or whatever the best currency is at the moment and shit like that. I'm just gonna use nice hash for now. So again, frames per second averaged at 45, score 1911, minimum 21, max 88. You know, that is a big range though. But the 21s were usually right when it was skipping from one scene to a new scene. Like right now, bam, that's where it would drop to 21, and then bam, jump right back up. So while it's actually running, it never dropped down to 21. You know, it stays pretty damn stable. I'm not going to save that one again because I already have some of these saved on different ones and stuff like that. Now, so you've seen two different ones. So we went from about 60 something frames per second average on an older game to 40 something frames per second on a 2000, I believe, like 11, a 2013 game. And now we're going to go to the 2017 game or test, you know, which is the Superposition benchmark. And this bitch is rough, is all I can say. It doesn't even have a 1080p low setting that I can like preset, but it can go up to 8K, and that's just absolutely insane. But 720p low is a joke. It looks like crap. So we're going to do 1080p medium, and I'm going to click custom, and we're going to use DirectX. That's fine. Full screen's enabled. 1080p is fine. I'm going to turn this down to low, turn this down to low, and then I'm going to leave the depth of field. Actually, what does it do when 720p low? See, it turns off both of those. No shit. So 1080p medium, let's go back to custom, and we'll turn all these off. So it really is 1080p low, depth of field and motion blur off. And we're going to hit run. So let's see what kind of frames we get out of a brand new game running at 1080p low compared to the other ones. Because honestly, I don't think I ever tested this one on stock, pretty much stock, you know, GPU. I always had mine overclocked and everything when I ran this one. And even with my overclock, if I ran on 1080p medium, the medium pre-default set, 20 frames per second is all I could get. I mean, it's literally just locked in right around 19 to 21 frames, and that's where it sat the whole time. 1080p low, like we're about to do now, I usually left motion blur and the other thing on, and I was sitting at about 30 frames per second. Right now, we're actually sitting at about 40 and just dropped down to 35. It's actually better than I was expecting, without having any overclock whatsoever on here. So it's down to about 32, 33. And this one you don't have to click, you know, benchmark on like the other ones do. This one, it really is just built to be a benchmark. But it tells you, you know, like your light sources, your triangles, and all that kind of shit. At one point it gives, you know, right here, 14 different light sources that it's loading and shit like that. 27 light sources, holy shit. And it's still running smooth at about 30 to 40 frames per second. I mean, it's actually very